Are you the shop where not only did you find that book, but you found the exact book that the mum had?
Story? Yeah.
I know that story.
Where do you know that story? Hi guys, thank you so much for stopping by. I am here with the fabulous Michelle Faber, who is in London for a while, and I have cornered him before he goes back home to have a very informal chat about books. I've seen, Michelle, in a previous interview that you did, that you said that you don't really remember your childhood years very much. And I was just wondering if you remembered like falling in love with books and music, because we've been talking about music, like when that kind of happened and what books you remember loving.
Well, it's scarier even than not being able to remember my childhood years, because I'm now forgetting the teenage years and early 20s. So
Okay. And how old are you now, if you don't mind?
I'm
asking?
55.
55, okay.
So as I live, the window of content shifts along like a window in a train.
Yeah.
And it takes in, it retains some years previously and it takes in the new stuff. And then I lose more of the old stuff.
Is it like a videotape that's re-recording on itself?
Yeah, that's
Do you know
right.
what I mean?
Not a bad simile. So I don't remember the first books that I was exposed to.
Yeah.
I know what was in my parents' bookcase. They had about 8 books, and one of them was a book of Italian short stories about a communist mayor and a Christian priest who were at eternal warfare. And those were really good stories by an Italian guy called Giovanni Goreschi. And that was, I think, my introduction to stories that were not just about plot, but that had some extra dimension. And the other books they had The Joy of Sex, with the original, you know, the guy with the beard doing the
I've seen it. We've had that in our bookshop. Yeah.
And my father covered that in wallpaper,
so that no one would know.
So that no one would know what it was. And of course, you're a kid. You look at the bookcase and this spine where there's no writing on it. There's just wallpaper.
Yeah.
So the first thing you do is pull it out.
Yeah.
So yeah, Joy of Sex, and pulp paperback by an author called Frank G. Slaughter, who used to write zillions of books. He was a mainstay of pulp fiction and completely forgotten now. But he wrote a book called Buchenwald Hell, which was about prisoners of war in the Buchenwald concentration camp being mistreated by the Nazis. And I think possibly my father had this book because he was guilty about his own past. He was in the Dutch National Socialist Party.
Okay.
So he was a Nazi, and obviously had a lot of trouble dealing with that after the war. So I think that was his little guilt playground. That novel. And that was it really for books in my household. When I was younger, I read everything that had print on it. I was the sort of person who couldn't pass a little fluttering piece of paper on the street by without picking it up and seeing what was written on it. And I read all the books in the school library, and I obviously read the set texts for English, but I also read all the books that weren't set. So I had a huge Beckett kick for a while. I wrote, because I was already writing novels from a very, very early age. And
do you remember what the first one was about, or one of the first ones?
Yeah. Well, the first one was called Knobbel and Bobble Go to the Moon. I wrote that when I was about 8 years old, and that was sort of half in Dutch, half in English. But
mine was Zippy the Wizard, and it was
Zippy
awful.
the Wizard?
Zippy. I think maybe I was copying that TV show Rainbow. It was awful anyway.
I don't know about Rainbow.
No, you dodged a bullet there. It's not that great. It's pretty bad, yeah.
No, but I wrote this novel about these mice who go to the moon, and I made the little book, and it was displayed in the primary school, and has no doubt been thrown into a skip decades ago. But anyway, that was technically the first. But the first novel that I did serious work on, which got close to being finished or viable, was a book called And They Shall Inherit the Earth. And it was a typical, I think I was 14 when I started at 15 maybe. And that was a typical adolescent male novel in that it was post-apocalyptic and all the shops and the buildings are abandoned because everyone's died of this.
Very ahead of your time. You were.
No. I probably had seen the Amiga now or something. I don't know. But anyway, it was this,
End of the world.
End of the world, teenage or slightly older than teenage protagonist picking through the ruins. And of course finding another survivor who happened to be female, so sex could happen.
Yeah.
And every year that I worked on this book, the quality of my prose improved.
Yeah.
So every year I would look back on what I'd written and think, this is complete crap. This is written by a child. So I'd go back and rewrite the whole thing.
You're like, I knew nothing last year, I know everything now.
Exactly. So like, there was the 15-year-old's version of this novel, and then there was the 16-year-old's version, and so on. And I spent hundreds of hours on this. And then when I was about 17, I discovered Beckett. And then the title, And They Shall Inherit the Earth, just sounded so fusty and superfluous. So I then retitled the novel Afters, which could be a Beckett play. It could be an undiscovered Beckett play. In fact, there may be a Beckett play called Afters. I couldn't say that I'm a total expert, but so it was called Afters for a long time. And then when I was about 18, I recognised that, this book just wasn't sound. But I'd learned a lot from trying to write it. And I also tried to write a novel about a rock musician, sort of based on John Lennon. I think that was called Leon and the Locomotion. Terrible title. The name of his band. But anyway, because I was a big Beatles fan. I'd read a lot about the Beatles and the whole Satyricon aspect of their touring and the sorts of things that their manager would not have wanted the world to know. So the book was all about that kind of thing. With, of course, lots of sex in it as well.
Obviously. Of course.
And then, having started and failed to finish all these books, I started wondering, how does one finish a novel?
You don't, it just gets taken off you. Isn't that right?
That's what they say, but I'm too much of a control freak to want anything taken off me before I'm finished with it. Thank you very much. That's why I don't sign contracts until I finish books.
Okay.
So yeah, I was thinking, how do you do it so that it doesn't fall apart? And I got married very, very young to a woman who also wanted to be a novelist. She later became an anthropologist, but at the time that I met her, she wanted to be a novelist. And she was writing an autobiographical novel, which fell apart, and sort of trying to help her with her novel. I was thinking, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I decided that I would write a Victorian novel, and that I would take a leaf out of the book of people like George Eliot, and I would just build the architecture of it very carefully. And I would plan out everything that was going to happen in it, and I'd have like a blueprint for each chapter. And then my challenge would be filling it in a way that was vivid and compelling, and all the rest of it, just as a way of finally finishing a book. And that's what I did with Crimson Petal and the White.
It's a pretty awesome place to kind of create, to be like, I'm going to write a novel, and then you write that.
Well,
that's just showing off. Stop
No.
it.
I did and I did not write that, in the sense that the first version of the book, she was called Phoenix before, because I wanted to sort of hit you over the head. This is.
She's being reborn.
Exactly. Yeah. And the first version of the book was very, very deterministic, very, very claustrophobically planned. And she died at the end because she dies at the start. It starts with this woman's body on the street. and you don't know whose body it is, and then you get caught up in the book and you forget that there was a woman at the start whose body, etc. And then at the end it's sugar.
Okay.
And it was the ultimate feel-bad ending.
There's a pretty... Though the ending of... You must get so many people saying to you and shaking your fist at you for the ending, the actual ending of Crimson Petal.
Particularly Americans got upset about that because they want a tidy...
They want to know.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there was one woman who wrote to me and said, I'm so upset at what you've done with the ending of that book. I love Sugar so much. She means so much to me. I need to know what happened with her. You've got to tell me that she was all right. Either that or kill her. I'm thinking, okay, you
Those are the only options.
Yeah.
Well, I love that bit. If I'm sure most of you guys have read The Crimson Petal, but if you haven't, you should. And at the end of The Crimson Petal, this is not really a spoiler, it ends. The narrator's like, oh, sorry, that's all. I've got better
It's
things
not
to do."
as casual as that. It's not as casual as that. I mean, at the beginning, the book does warn you.
It does. That he says, I'm just going to take you where I feel.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
The voice of the book at the beginning it's the voice of literature and the voice of a prostitute saying, come with me, I'll show you a good time.
And he does show you a good time.
Or she, or it.
Yeah.
And then the time is over.
Yeah, it is.
But I think in the final chapters of the book there is a sort of slow closing down. You know, London does sort of go to sleep and various characters get dealt with.
I was very glad when William fell through the stairs. That made me very happy. But Agnes was my favourite. She was my favourite. I think a lot of people, say that Sugar is their favourite, but Agnes was mine.
I've met a few people who really love Agnes.
I do.
And my favourite, I think, is Emmeline Fox, who a lot of people don't like because she's a sincere Christian. But I just love it when she goes unhinged after Henry's death and she's in this house with all his furniture and her furniture and there's no room for anything anymore. And she's walking around naked and picking up the cat turds. You know, it just... I'm very fond of it.
She's great. You mentioned before about the lady who'd written to you. I love that bit at the beginning of the collection of stories, The Apple, where you put in bits of fan mail that people have sent you.
I'm very glad you read it too, because a lot of people see themselves as just novel readers.
Oh, no, I'm all over the short stories.
Good,
I am.
good.
Yeah.
Short stories, they're a good thing.
They are, they're
They
really
are a
good,
good
thing. Yeah,
I've had these weird interactions with people in signing queues where they come up to me and they say, Crimson Petal's my favourite book ever and I love these characters so much. Please write a sequel. And I tell them, well, I don't write sequels, but there is this book of short stories where various characters from the Crimson Petal, you get to meet them at different points in their life, and it doesn't follow on from the book, but you do get more of those characters. And as I'm giving this little spiel, which lasts like 30 seconds, their eyes are glazing over, and so they're wandering somewhere else, because it's short stories, and they are not short story readers.
I have that in the bookshop when people recommend me something. I'll be like, oh, there's this, and then I start and I get the film as well when they realise it's short stories. And
what is that about?
I don't know. I mean, I get wanting to be immersed in a story, but short stories are so fun. You get to do so many different things and snippets. Sometimes like life is not about a whole story. It's about the little things. We should have a banner. We should be holding a banner, a short stories banner.
Yes.
Yeah. Where would you encourage people to start with your work? If they've never read anything by you, where should they go?
Well, of course, all the books are very different from each other.
They are, yeah.
So, what is going to float one person's boat is not going to float another's. I'm very, very proud of and fond of and involved with the Book of Strange New Things, and that's not just this author thing of the latest is the one that you plug, but I think it's my most humane and compassionate and good-humoured and also the saddest book. You know, it is the most of many things.
It was my favourite book of last year, and I'm not just saying that because you're sitting next to me. These guys know I've been pushing it on a lot of people. It's beautiful.
The vulnerable thing about it is that if someone like you
Mm.
can say to a friend of yours, don't ask me anything about this book,
Just read it.
just read it, trust me, and they take it from you and they start reading it, then everything's fine. But if someone says, just tell me what it's about.
I've done that. I tell people it's about a guy called Peter who goes across space to preach the word of God, and they're like, oh, religion. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
how do you, once you've committed that faux pas and they've said, oh, religion, oh, science fiction, how do you then rescue the situation? Or,
Well, I tell them that it's just about what it means to be human and loving someone and feeling far away from them. And really the only not that I'm against science fiction, I love science fiction, but the only science fiction bit is that he's gone over there.
yeah.
That's it.
I mean, Eva, my wife,
Yeah.
she was aware of the potential that people who might love this book and get comfort from it and consolation wouldn't read it because they've decided that it's science fiction and they don't read science fiction. And she said, why can't you send him to North Korea? Why does it have to be another planet? And I thought about it for a while, but he had to be so far away that there was serious doubt that he could ever get back.
Yeah. Can we talk about poetry?
Yeah.
Are you writing? I've read the beautiful pamphlet that you put together, Poems of Eva. Which is wonderful. And are you working?
There are about 45 to 50 of those now.
Okay. Yeah.
And the collection is just about ready. There's a risk when you're a good poet, when you're a fine poet, and you're quite removed in time from the loss, that you will end up writing an elegant, interesting poem which happens to have grief as its subject matter, but doesn't have
the anger.
Can you say mindfuck on YouTube?
Yeah, you can say that.
Which doesn't have the mindfuck of it having just happened to you. And I wanted my poems to have that kind of...
They do. The ones I've read anyway.
Yeah. So I feel now is the time to wrap up that collection. And if a year from now I go into another phase of my grief and a beautiful poem comes along, which I wish retrospectively was in the collection, and so be it. But I have an instinct that now is the time to pull that collection together.
Yeah. Because
I'm now finding a way to be in the world without Eva. That doesn't mean I don't still love her, it doesn't mean I'm not grieving for her.
Of course.
But I'm not in that state of having been hit by something completely unbearable and undigestible. So the poems that deal with that are the ones that I want in that collection.
Yeah. And Becca mentioned, I'm not sure if this is something you want to talk about here, if not, that's fine, but that you've been looking at Eva's writing as well.
Yes, Eva wrote a lot, and her stories were autobiographical. She grew up in a quite bizarre context where her parents were both very badly damaged by the Second World War. They were refugees from Poland. They were both of them were both Polish and German, with all the issues surrounding that. And they were Jehovah's Witnesses, so they'd had persecution of all kinds. And she grew up in Australia, where they fled via East Germany. And the mother was very severely OCD and paranoid, so Eva was kept virtually locked into her home, wasn't allowed to play with other children, and there was lots of violence in the home. And very, very weird childhood she had, and she wrote about this in her stories. But while she was alive, there were a number of places where she didn't go in the stories because she was concerned about offending family members that she was just re-establishing contact with. She was a talented writer, she had it, but there's lots of things as a young writer or as an inexperienced writer that you need to struggle with and deal with and find solutions for, and she didn't have the time because she put all that time and energy into her visual work. She was a great photographer and very, very interesting artist, visual artist, and she was able to get those things done quicker than writing, because writing takes a long time, and once she got cancer she didn't have much time, so she spent less energy getting those stories, you know, closer to finished form. She did want them to live, and I'm really the only person who's going to make that happen. Obviously I can't be her. She was a very different person from me. She had a different mind, a different sensibility. So inevitably the stories will become a fusion of the two of us. And the fusion itself could be interesting. I'm actually not aware that it's ever been done before. I mean, you obviously know more about books than I do.
No.
So
let's say it hasn't been done before. Let's say.
So yeah, a book by Eva and Michelle Faber with those fused sensibilities.
I think it's been done, but not by a couple together like that, as far as I'm aware. I think that's going to create something beautiful.
I hope so. I've finished 4 of the stories so far, and I've shown individual stories to various people, and I've shown all 4 stories to another writer. And everyone so far seems to be agreed that they don't feel like Michelle Faber stories. They feel like something else. And the person who's seen all 4 of them says they all feel like the work of the same person, which is tremendously encouraging for me, because the ratio of Eva's original prose in each of the stories is wildly different. You know, some of them are, she got 95% of the way there and I've filled in some bits, and others are just 15% her prose and I've provided the other 85%. So it's just tremendously encouraging that her worldview and her sensibility, that I've managed to preserve that or not spoil that in some way. The other big literary project that I'm working on is gigantic biography of her, which is not for publication, it's for her descendants.
Okay.
So if she's fated to have grandchildren in the future or great-grandchildren, whatever, then there will be this Book of Eva with all the photographs scanned in of her family, explaining who the people are. Because often when someone dies, you inherit this little shoebox of photos, and you can sort of recognise your dad, but all these other people in the picture, who are they?
I recognise that nose, and maybe like they're being like, I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm filling in all that. You know, I've been talking to surviving family members and trying to fill in those gaps and write the names in, and bring in all the data about what she was doing in given years. And Eva was married 3 times, I was her 3rd husband, so I've been talking to her 2nd and 1st husbands and filling in all that, and talking to the people who played with her when she was a kid, and just trying to find basically everyone who knew her. And on the one hand, that's the pitiful, grieving, please, I can't let go of Eva, can we talk about Eva together thing. But I'm not really ashamed or awkward about that, because it's also making this thing which could be of use to somebody else.
And also because she was Eva. Like, you don't have to make apologies for doing that. Like, you're allowed.
Yeah.
And is it fascinating but also terrifying that maybe you'll find something out that you didn't know?
So far, the only things I've found out only make me love her more. When her oncologist knew that I was going through all her papers, he asked me, "Have you found anything that surprised you?" And I could tell by the tone of his voice that
he knew something.
that he really meant, "Have you found evidence that she was in fact having an affair with somebody else and you never knew?"
Yeah.
You know, that sort of thing. But no. I mean, she was a more complicated person than I imagined, but then everybody is. And there was a lot more in play than I thought there was. But it just makes her a more extraordinary person.
Yeah. I think probably we better wrap it up, because I've kept you here for a long time. Yeah. But we could just hide away from the world in here and that would be acceptable.
Well,
there are some good books.
The Canongate offices.
There's music.
And audio books, there's all sorts of things.
Yeah. Thank you so much for allowing me to question you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go check out Michelle's books. Go read them. And then, and then go tell the world.
Short stories are a good thing.
Yeah. There you go. I'll speak to you guys later. Lots of books love. Bye.